Glenn has really worked hard on his presentation. I think you're going to just love it. He's added a lot of little details to it, and that's just part of his personality. He's fun. So with that, here's Glenn Zerbst. Oh, and also, if you can hold your comments until after we're done, that'd be great. Here's Glenn.
Well, thank you for coming. I want to welcome everyone. And before we get started, I have a song, but don't worry, I won't be singing it, and it goes something like this.
Cowboys and horses, hobos and trains, they're gone forever from the rails and the plains. Cowboys and horses, hobos and trains, but Lord, I'd like to see them again. Cowboys don't ride anymore on the range. Tattered old hobos no longer catch trains. 6 guns and saddles, handouts and steel, they're gone forever from the life that we knew. The rails stand silent, they're coated with rust. The bunkhouse is empty, all covered with dust. And a ghostly voice sings refrains of cattle calls, and echoes fade on the old cannonball. Cowboys and horses, hobos and trains, they're gone forever from the rails and the plains. Cowboys and horses, hobos and trains, but Lord, I'd like to see them again. The sun is setting on a time long ago, on cowboys and horses, on trains and hobos, and the pages of time, they turn so endlessly, and the things we love are just memories. Like cowboys and horses, hobos and trains, they're gone forever from the rails and the plains. Yes, cowboys and horses, hobos and trains, but Lord, I'd like to see them again. Oh, what I'd give to see them again.
Well, I hope that everyone enjoyed the song. Can everyone hear me? My talk today is about the legacy of cowboys and trains, and as Cindy said, hold your questions and comments until I'm done. I don't want to get derailed in my talk. And if I do, we'll start over and start down the track again. Well, now, Cindy at the Anna Miller Museum had asked me to do an oral history talk, and I told Cindy that I'm not a public speaker. I've never spoken in front of a crowd of people in my life. And she said, well, you know quite a little history. Well, I do know some. But Cindy, I owe you an apology. I was thinking when I was going to a one-room schoolhouse on the Cheyenne River, called 7 Mile, each year at Christmas time we said a Christmas poem, and we get up in front of a crowd of 15 to 20 people. But boy, that's been 70 years ago. Well, we'll see how it goes today. Now, after the Civil War, the trains and the cowboys come west to settle. There were thousands of sheep and cattle traded in this area to the free grass. In the late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s, and early 1900s. And I'm going to talk about some of the ranches in this area today, most of them along the Cheyenne River. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is the Fiddleback Ranch, which was on the Cheyenne River. And here is the picture of the Fiddleback Ranch. We might have to take the picture, we'll see.
Still not showing it.
If it's PowerPoint, a page down might do it on the keyboard.
Bear with us, we'll get it here in a little bit.
Okay, it's showing up on mine. Okay, let me resume. Again, we went through this several times.
Try page down, the key on the keyboard.
There we go. This is how the Fiddleback Ranch looked years ago. I have one more picture of the Fiddleback Ranch. Now, the Historical Society in Newcastle took a tour out there last fall. We learned about the ranch and the early history of it. I have one more picture of it.
It's the same one. Okay, and it's not working. Any other ideas, Walter?
Bigger hammer. Resume and then page down.
Here comes the doctor. We'll get it going.
I'm just going to start pushing buttons. Yours is first.
Okay, that's good work. The Fiddleback Ranch had both cattle and sheep over the years. And the owner of the Fiddleback today is the Thai chicken family. Is any of their family here today? I don't see any. I think this ranch was established in about 1878, if I remember right. And some of the buildings are still standing there today. That's an old wind charger tower out there for the ones that don't know. There's a sheep wagon in the back, old bunkhouse all covered with dust.
This is going to be the most exciting video I've put together.
We'll see about that, Walter. It might be.
You're gonna have to edit it. We know there's pictures because we've seen them earlier.
Well, we're going to just end this and then we'll try to start over. Not sure. Start the slideshow. And kind of keep done.
And at that point, I've always used page down.
Cowboys, the horse, cowboys, the horses. They're gone
Couldn't get them to do that.
Let's go to the next slide.
Yay.
Okay, I think we got it now.
Your blessing of hands. Lay them on there, girls, lay them on there.
Now here's the second picture of the Fiddleback Ranch in the early days. I have a third picture of the old sheep wagons. They're just wasted away out there in the old Wyoming weather. Some of the other pictures I have, or some of the other ranches I'll talk about along the Cheyenne River, will be the 4W Ranch, which the Harshberg family has today. Any of them here? Another ranch is AU7 Ranch, which is owned by Bob Stoddard. Bob here today? And also, there was a Bridle Bit Ranch, S&G Ranch, 21 Horse Ranch, 77 Ranch, and there were several others. I have a picture of the MW Ranch, which was on Stockade Beaver, and this picture was taken in 1911, and it was owned by John Meade. Now, in the 1960s and 70s, I think I knew every rancher from the 4W Ranch all the way down the Cheyenne River to Edgemont, and from Edgemont down the railroad tracks to Ardmore, South Dakota. But most of these old ranches are all gone, and there's a few of them left today, and there's some of them in the crowd here today. Well, in 1887 and 88, a blizzard hit this area, and it took a big toll on the livestock industry. People didn't feed their cattle supplement feed in them days as we do today. Now, there was a spring roundup where they did the branding, a fall roundup where they gathered cattle and they were trailed to railroads and shipped to market. Okay, each ranch had a ranch foreman, several cowboys, a horse wrangler, and there was a cook for the chuck wagons. There's a bedroll wagon, and the cowboys slept out underneath the stars in their bedrolls. Now I wonder how many of these cowboys woke up with a rattlesnake in their bed. Now at this time, I want to honor the oldest cowboy on the Cheyenne River, Russ Christensen. And this is Russ when he was a young man.
Hold on a second.
Congratulations, Russ. Well, Russ is a 1930 model, and he is still ranching on the place he was born and raised on the Cheyenne River with the help of his son, Bill. Well, Russ, I want you to come up here. I have a plaque for you that was being made, but the young gentleman building it has had health issues, and he didn't get it finished. But I do have a picture of what I want to present you with, and I'll give it to you today. This is the oldest cowboy on the Cheyenne River. Congratulations. Welcome. Now, when this guy gets this built, I'll bring it down to you. I know where you live.
Cool.
Let's see here. Yep. Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Well, Russ was inducted into the Cowboy Hall of Fame in 2021, and here's a picture of him with his plaque. Well, that doesn't surprise me because I know that Russ spent a lot of time horseback doing his ranch work and helping his neighbors with their ranch work. He used to help my folks brand when I was young, and he didn't have a horse trailer to haul his horse, and Russ would be at the far end of the pasture before daylight, ready to gather cattle. Well, I asked Russ about this one time, and I said, how did you get up there? It was about 7 miles up there in the dark. His answer was, I was riding a good horse. Now I have a couple brand books here. Wyoming. They're over 100 years old. They're laying up here on the table, and they're 1916 and 1919. Now, some of the brands in these books are being used by the ranchers in this area today. And here is a picture of the brand that my family used on their ranch. The 3 half circles and the Lazy C Bar Z. Now, the 3 half circles was a exceptionally good brand because it was easy to read and it was just a 1-iron brand. The next picture I have is gathering cattle at the Zerbst Ranch on Bogey Creek in 1954. Another picture is feeding cattle on Snyder Creek in 1954. Now, my dad is driving the Jeep, and I'm not sure who's doing all the work pitching the hay. But you don't see people feeding hay like this anymore. I think it's been at least 40 years since I've seen a hay rack with hay and somebody with a pitchfork. Okay, the next picture I have was Chris Christensen, who was the father to Russ Christensen. And Chris was born in Denmark in 1889, and he came to America as a young man, in 1907.
6.
Okay, 1906. I got my wrong history on that, Russ. Okay, one of his first jobs was working at a livery stable in Edgemont. And here's the picture of the livery stable that Chris worked at. Now, this livery stable was owned by my wife's grandfather, John Miller. He is the big man on the left. The two small girls were my wife's aunts. Well, as people came into Edgemont by the train, Chris would take them to their homestead, or maybe even take a doctor out to someone needing a doctor. Now, one of the stories I heard about was there was a family in Colorado, the Anthony Cedric family, and I'm sure there's some of their family here today. Well, they had bought a ranch in Wyoming near the Cheyenne River. They came from Colorado to Edgemont by train, and Chris delivered them to their new home on the Cheyenne River. And it was between Christmas and New Year's, and the weather was quite cold. Well, they said that Chris had delivered them to their new home, and they had asked him to spend the night and return the next day. But Chris didn't hardly understand English, and they didn't understand Danish, so he returned that night, making a trip of somewhere around 45 to 50 miles. Well, they said he nearly froze to death, but he was a tough Dane. Now, 1910, Chris took a homestead on Alkali Creek near the Cheyenne River in Wyoming. And he also worked for a large sheep ranch on the Cheyenne River, which was the 7L Ranch. Well, in the spring of 1912, a blizzard hit that area, and they said nearly 8,000 sheep perished in the storm. In 1917, World War I started, and Chris served in France during World War I. Now, when Chris returned, he came back to his homestead and continued working on the 7L Ranch. Well, in the meantime, there's a pretty little girl from Michigan named Ann.
It was interesting when he was removed. There's quite a few people that will remember my comments at the time because it came after Ogden, reportedly, I guess you should say, because it was reported, and then he claimed that didn't happen, but we all saw the letters where he made the chairmans of the board sign that we're going to do this and that and the other thing, and we're not going to disobey. And
we're not going to disobey. I love that. I love that part. We're not going to disobey.
Pretty much. That's what I got
Yeah.
from it. Reading it is, aye, Captain, we will follow your rule. It kind of made me look a little different at Driscoll. And then this year's made
Well,
it
and you
even.
didn't just look different. Come on. You gave him a nickname even.
I gave him a nickname. He was saved in my phone still to this day as Dictator Driscoll. And I still don't feel bad about that because Weston County hasn't seen him once leading up to this session.
Well, in the meantime, there's a pretty little girl from Michigan named Ann. She came all the way from Michigan to the Cheyenne River area to teach school. Ann was born in 1900. Now, Ann taught my dad at the Central School near the Cheyenne River, and she also taught me in the 4th and 5th grade. When her and Chris were married, they made their home on 7 Mile Creek near the Cheyenne River and continued ranching there the rest of their life. They had 3 children, Fred, Gene, and Russ. Well, Gene taught me in the 1st grade at 7 Mile School, and the year would have been 1951. Now, Gene's daughter and son-in-law are here today from Casper, and Gene's daughter was also a school teacher, and thanks for coming. Russ stayed on the ranch and continued ranching with his dad. He served in the Army. He raised his family there, along with his son Bill, and as I said earlier, he is still there where he was born and raised with his help of his son Bill. What an amazing cowboy. The next family I'll talk about is the Hanson family. Henrik Hanson was born in Utah in 1876, and in 1905 he helped trail 24 bands of sheep from western Wyoming to the 7L Ranch on the Cheyenne River, and he also was a foreman of this large sheep ranch. Well, Henrik married Roxy Friel, and they had the Roxton Post Office store on their ranch on the Cheyenne River. They had 3 kids, 1 girl and 2 boys. Now, Glenn stayed on the ranch and continued ranching with his dad, and he married Phyllis Austin. They had 1 boy and 4 girls. Carolyn, the oldest girl, is here today, is on the ranch today, and her husband, Vern, are still ranching there, raising livestock. Are you here, Carolyn? Yeah, there she is, her and Vern. Thanks for coming. Now, I have a branding picture next of the Reed Ranch, or the 7L Ranch. It was the same ranch, and I'll talk about it a little later. Well, Jim Reed was born in 1901 in Harrison, Nebraska, and he bought the 7L Ranch on the Cheyenne River in 1927. The Reed family is still ranching on this ranch today. They've been there for nearly 100 years. Well, Jim married a school teacher named Betty, and Betty and Jim had 2 boys, young Jim and Tom. Well, Betty taught me when I was a freshman in high school at the 7 Mile School. And that was the last year they had country high school in Niobrara County. Well, there was myself and 5 girls, and half of the high school class is here today, and then myself, Carolyn Hanson Johnson, and Ruthie Zerbst Spence. Well, Jim stayed on the ranch and continued ranching there the rest of his life. When I was 16 years old, I worked for Jim on his ranch, and he paid me $3 a day, which was quite a little money for me at that time. Jim's son, Jeff, and his son are still ranching on the ranch today. And are they raised here today? Okay, yeah, thanks for coming. Okay, the picture, the branding, I knew all the cowboys in this picture. Their names are down below, and if you can't see them there, they'll be up front here in a binder on the table. There's 2 of them still living today, and they are Russ Christensen and Franklin Mankey. Now, the Mankeys had a ranch down the Cheyenne River from the Reed Ranch, and I knew all the Mankey family, and Franklin and his wife Audrey live in Edgemont today. Another early pioneer on the Cheyenne River was Mose Cooksey. Well, Mose came to the country in 1920 and settled there and stayed there the rest of his life. Now, Mose's grandson, Donnie Cooksey, is on the ranch today, and Donnie does all his cowboying from this airplane. I've been visiting with Donnie some, and he tells me that he learned how to fly from his father, John Cooksey, when he started learning about 10 years of age. And for his 16th birthday, he received his pilot's license. And in order to get a pilot's license, he had to have 100 hours of flying. So he's been flying quite a while. And since then, he has flown somewhere around 15,000 hours. Most of his flying has been flying air ambulances. He would pick up patients in small towns, and he would fly them to Billings, Casper, Rapid City, Sioux Falls, Minneapolis, Omaha, Scottsbluff, Denver, Salt Lake, Phoenix, and even El Paso, Texas. Now, Donnie, I want to thank you for coming, and I also want to thank you for providing that kind of service. I'm sure that you have saved several lives. Okay, the next picture is an Indian Creek roundup, and this picture was taken north of Lusk near the Hat Creek store in 1910. Now, I knew three of the cowboys in this picture, and they were Jack Hunter, Oat Hill, and Eve Hogg. Well, Jack Hunter later had a ranch at Ardmore, and he had two boys, Jack Jr. and Dean. And the Hunter family is still ranching on this ranch today. They've been there for over 100 years. Eve Hogg, Oat Hill, oh, excuse me, I got to get back on track yet. I got derailed there. Jack Hunter told me that when he was a young cowboy riding on the range in his roundups, that he had trailed some horses from somewhere around Bill, Wyoming to Ardmore to be shipped out by rail. And he said the only meal he got, he stopped at Dick Zerbst ranch on Snyder Creek, and Dick fed him dinner. And Dick would have been my granddad. Okay, the next guy was Oat Hill, and Oat was the cook for the chuck wagons, and he lived in Edgemont in the 1960s and 70s when I lived there. Now, Oat was a fairly large man, and he wore a floppy Stetson hat. Okay, Eve Hogg was a short, stocky man, and I'll talk about him a little later when I talk about the Hogg family. And here's the picture of the Hat Creek store as it looks today along Highway 85. The next picture I have is the MW chuck wagon and bedroll wagon, and this was taken in 1911, and it was owned by John Meade. The Baldwin family owns this ranch today. Are you here, Gene? I don't see Gene, but the Baldwin family owns this ranch today. Another picture is a group of cowboys from the 77 ranch, and this was taken near Lusk. The only one I have ever heard of, and this picture that I know of, is Joe Bright on the right. I didn't know him, but I knew about him. Now I have a picture. The next picture is of a building. Does anybody recognize this building or know anything about it? Well, seems like some people do. Well, for those that don't, this is the Carlin Hospital, and it was in Newcastle, behind where Hometown Medical is today, down near Cambridge Creek. Well, I was born in this hospital on December 23rd, 1943. Well, Mike Jordan and Shelley Redhauer. Oh, I got derailed again. I got to get back on track. I have the hard copy of my birth certificate here today. And it says, Wyoming, 1943, 14, the county I grew up in. Now, it's getting a little rusty, but I'm getting a little rusty, too. Anybody got one of these hard copies of theirs? Okay, now we're getting back on track here. Shelley Redhauer and Mike Jordan wrote a book about Weston County, and they mentioned this building in their book. They said it was built in 1903. Well, quite a few things happened in Newcastle in 1903, and I'm going to share some of them with you today. First, this building was built, and here's a picture of me when I was about 5 years old. Now, Jordan said in his book, this building was built in 1903. Well, excuse me. I want to tell you about some of the things that happened in 1903 in Newcastle. Well, this building was built, and it was a house of ill repute until 1918. They had a quail out back where you park your horse, and they said it was a successful business. Well, later on, it became the Star Hotel, and after that, the Carlin Hospital. Now, anybody born in Newcastle in the 1940s was probably born in this hospital. And I see some of the crowd today that was born there. So, in 1903, another thing, the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, arrived in Newcastle on a passenger train, and people came for miles around, foot, horseback, however they get here, for this event. There was a large crowd attending, and everyone seemed to enjoy it. Also, in 1903, Diamond L. Slim was hung from a railroad bridge for two murders that he had done. Well, Slim was in jail in Newcastle. The cowboys were camped out at Lodgepole, some 30 miles west of Newcastle. They'd heard about this, so they rode into Newcastle one night, broke into the jail, took Slim out, took him to the railroad bridge and hung him. Slim was 33 years old. Now, about 5 years ago, there was a reenactment of this, and I got to help do the reenactment. We went and broke Slim out of jail. We took him to the railroad bridge and hung Slim the second time. Well, there was quite a large crowd attended that evening, and everyone seemed to enjoy it. Now, also in 1903, Sheriff Billy Miller was killed in the last Indian battle in Wyoming on Lightning Creek. And also killed in that battle was a deputy sheriff, Lewis Falkenberg, from Douglas, and a few dead Indians. Well, Frank Zerbst, who was my granddad's brother, was in on this battle, and they said it when it was over. Frank was still out in the open. They didn't know whether Frank was brave or he was too damn scared to run. Some more about Frank Zerbst. Frank was born in Germany, and he came to America as a young boy, and he settled on Lodgepole Creek in Weston County near the Mike Cory Ranch, who was Rhonda Stearns' grandparents. Well, Frank got married, and here's a picture of Frank in his wedding picture. His wife was from Omaha. Well, Frank's homestead, this here is how it looks today. There's not much left of it, but I know where there's a lot of these old homesteads similar to this, and about all that's left of them is just the memories. And Frank raised sheep, and not far from Frank's homestead, there's some of these sheep are monuments, and they've been standing for over 100 years. They're on the Greaves Ranch in Weston County. Now, they've been standing longer than Mount Rushmore's been carved. There was also a family on the Cheyenne River, the Smallwood family, and the only one I knew was Brownie Smallwood. Well, when Brownie was young, he played for country dances in the area, and he did some cowboying. Brownie and his wife Hope lived in Newcastle in the 1980s, and I got to know Brownie fairly well. Brownie had told me a story about Frank that I'm going to share with you today. He said when he was 16, 17 years old, he'd ask his father for a pair of boots, and his dad said, "Brownie, we don't have enough money to buy you a pair of boots." Well, things were pretty tough in them days. So Brownie said he got on his horse one day and he rode up to Lodgepole to Frank Zerbst Ranch, and Frank had gave him a job herding sheep. Now, I don't recall how long he said he worked for Frank, but he said when he left, Frank gave him $10. Well, the next time Brownie was in Newcastle, he went and bought a pair of boots for $8. Now, you'd play hell buying a pair of boots today in Newcastle for $8. I doubt if you could buy a pair of socks for $8. Now, I think we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Everybody get up and stretch, get a drink of water or a cookie, and we'll start up again in about 10 minutes. Have you enjoyed it? Thank you. Okay, we'll start again with our talk.
Once or twice a week, she'll post something.
Check things out, just about like when we came in.
I think it's on, wasn't it?
Tap it. Tap it, see if it's on.
It's on.
It's on, Glenn.
Okay, we're going to start again. The next person I'm going to talk about is Dick Zerbst, who was my granddad, and he was also a brother to Frank Zerbst. Did everybody hear me back there?
No, certainly not.
Well, let's see.
Now they can.
Now they can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like you were doing in the first half?
Or tip it up at least. Tip it up.
How's that?
Better.
Okay. The next person I'm going to talk about is Dick Zerbst, who was a brother to Frank Zerbst, and he was also my granddad. Well, Dick was born in Germany in 1870. He came to America with his family when he was 10 or 11 years old. I never did know where the ship landed, but wherever it did, the family got on a train and came west to make a new life and raise their family. Well, they came as far as Harrison, Nebraska, and that was the end of the rail line at that time. So they went out north of Harrison and settled on a homestead, and there were already quite a few German families in that area. There was a German school, or a school where they taught the German language. There's still quite a few of the German families in that area today. Well, these early settlers that came from the old country over here to make a new life, they had a lot of hardships. There was blizzards, droughts, depressions, wars, and flu epidemics, and most of them had to learn a new language. And they had from 3 to 10 kids to raise. Well, here's a picture of my granddad, Dick, in the early days as a cowboy. They said he was a pretty fair hand with a horse. I also have a picture of Dick in a frame up here on an easel. And in this picture, Dick has a 6-shooter on, which was pretty common in them days. About every cowboy carried one, and they knew how to use them. Now in this picture, the horse that Dick is on, the mane and tail had never been trimmed. I asked my dad about that one day, and he said, well, if the mane and tail were trimmed, everybody would think it was a broke horse. Well, later on, Dick settled on Snyder Creek in Niobrara County near the Cheyenne River, and here is a picture of his cabin. It was made from cottonwood logs, and it had a dirt roof, and that's Dick out in front, and this picture was taken in 1903 or 4. Well, Dick married a lady from Omaha, Nebraska named Helen, and here's their wedding picture. My grandparents are on the right, and her sister and brother are standing up for him on the left. And that was in 1909. Well, she came to Wyoming from Omaha to start a new life and raise a family. And she also homesteaded near Dick's cabin. Well, they had 3 children, Bill, Marjorie, and Jim. Well, Helen died at an early age of 38 years old and left Dick to raise the 3 kids and also run a ranch. The 3 kids, and Bill was my dad, and he was born in 1910. And here's a picture of my dad at an early age. And they did wear dresses in them days on young children. One more picture is my dad with their first car, a Model T Ford, which I think he said they bought for around $500 or $600. Another picture is my dad with his brother Jim, taken in 1921. And I have another picture of my dad and his brother after they grew up, and this was taken in 1952.
In addition to the weekly printed version of the newsletter journal, we also promote our community and share important information on our award-winning website, newslj.com, and in our weekly email newsletter, Nuke Now. We also connect with readers through various social media platforms and invite you to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can even take a look at a recent meeting of the City Council, School Board, or County Commission on our YouTube channel. We do hope that you will go to newslj.com and subscribe today, and we look forward to making all of our great content available to you. But regardless of your level of support, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing your part to preserve a free and independent local press.
And I have another picture of my dad and his brother after they grew up, and this was taken in 1952. Okay, my dad homesteaded and got 640 acres, not too far from where he was raised. I got derailed there. I got to back up a little bit, get back on track. When my dad was a young boy, their address was Warren, Wyoming, which is some 20 miles south of where they were raised. And about every 10 to 7 days, he would take a gunny sack and a horseback and ride to the Warren post office and get the mail. Well, that made about a 40-mile trip for him. Now, my dad took this homestead and got 640 acres, and he also bought out a couple other homesteaders that had settled in and gave it up and left, and he bought their homestead for $3 and $4 an acre. Well, Bill married Edna Butoff, and they had 4 children, Bob, Irma, myself, and Leonard. Now, 14 years ago, I located a half-sister, Marjorie, who lives in Las Vegas, Nevada, and she wasn't able to come today. But Marjorie and I have done some traveling together, and we enjoy each other visiting quite a bit on the telephone. Now here's a picture of a schoolhouse, or this is the picture of the house that I grew up in on my dad's homestead. Well, we had a 32-volt light plant that worked right all the time, and when that didn't work, we used a kerosene lantern. Although we did have running water, we would take a bucket and run down to the spring and pump it full of water and run back to the house. That was the running water. We had a 2-hole privy with a Sears Roebuck and a Words catalog. Now here's another picture of some of my family. The girl on the left was a friend staying with us. My sister Irma, my younger brother Leonard, and myself. And that was taken in 1954 on our homestead where we grew up. I have another picture of the 7-mile school, and there's the schoolhouse and some of the students. The teacher's Betty Reed, and different kids in the school that went to school there. And that was a 7-mile school, and it was about 5 miles from where I lived. In the spring of the year, a lot of times there was a snowstorm coming, and we didn't go to school for about a week because no one plowed the roads in them days. And if the Cheyenne River was running high, we couldn't cross, but we had a cable car that we crossed, and the bus driver from the other side would take us to the school. Now, when we arrived at the 7-mile school, one of the first things we did was raise the flag and said the pledge. And the flag at that time only had 48 stars. Well, I got a message from Chris Christian again. As I said, we had Christmas programs, and Chris would show up at the Christmas programs, and he would sing Christmas carols in Danish. I have no idea what the hell they were, but it sure sounded different to me as a young boy. Now, some of the students that went to the 7-mile school were the Hanson kids, the Gaskell girls, the Zerbst, the Gibbses, and usually there was a hired man that had kids that went to school there. We did have 2 blacks, and that was their names. Now, my second and third grade teacher is still living, and she's 89 years old, and her name is Nellie Marchant. And her son, Jay, and his wife, Laura, are here from Hot Springs. Thanks for coming. Marjorie, my dad's sister, was born in 1911, and she married Pat Marchant, and they made their home on Bogey Creek and had one son, Jack, which was Jay's dad. And Marjorie was also a school teacher, and here's a picture of the school that she taught at the Perel School, north and west of where I lived. And the students was Marjorie's son, Jack, and the 3 other kids was the Pfeiffer kids, and one of the Pfeiffer family still living here in Newcastle today. Let's see. Okay, Jim was my dad's younger brother, and he was born in 1919, and he married Nancy Butoff, and they lived in a sheep wagon when they were first married until they got a home built to live in. They had 2 children, young Jim Jr. and Ruthie Zerbst Spence, who is here today, and thanks for coming. Okay, in them days, in early days, there were no sale barns around, so people trailed their cattle for miles around to the Dewey stockyards, and they were shipped out by rail. But Dewey was noted to be the largest shipping point on that line of the railroad. An old friend of mine, Ike Finn, west of Newcastle, told me that in 1919 his dad trailed cattle to Dewey and shipped them to Omaha, and he didn't get enough out of the cattle to pay for the shipping. Well, in 1934, a drought hit this area, and my dad and his brother trailed their cattle to Montana to the Powder River for grass. Now, they pretty much followed the Texas Trail because they did cross the east end of our ranch near the Cheyenne River. They later sold their cattle and went into the sheep business, and they bought a band of sheep, and they brought them to their ranch. Now, with sheep, you have 2 incomes a year. You have wool in the spring and lambs in the fall. Well, sheep have to be herded, so my dad went to Newcastle to the Sedgwick hardware store. Does anybody know where the Sedgwick hardware store was? Well, here's the one guy does. Well, for those that don't, it was in the basement where A1 Agency is today. And here is a picture of a sheep wagon. Now, this is not the sheep wagon that my dad bought, but they all pretty much look the same. And the next picture, the first sheep wagon ever built was in Rawlins, Wyoming in 1884, and this would be an early day sheep camp. The wagon, the dogs, the sheep, and the herders. Now, in 1946, my dad and his brother went out of the sheep business and back into the cattle business, and they sold their sheep wagon to Chris Christensen. Well, this sheep wagon today is in Casper, Wyoming, to Chris's granddaughter and her husband, and they're sitting here on the front row. Thanks for coming. Well, my dad and his brother always had a hired man around, and one of them that I knew the best was a guy by the name of Murray Butler. This is Murray on his horse. Well, Murray worked for my dad and Jim off and on, and Murray kind of took a liking to me, and I took a liking to him, and we became friends from then on. Well, later on, Murray leased a ranch near the Lance Creek oil field called the Bell Place. And there's Murray and his son Dean and his wife are here today. And thanks for coming. Well, that year I was 13 years old, and Murray had asked me if I would come over and help him on his ranch. Well, that's what I wanted him to do, so I went over and helped Murray on his ranch. And Murray taught me everything I knew about riding horses and being a cowboy. That's all Murray ever did was cowboy and ranch. He's the only guy I ever seen that could roll a Bull Durham cigarette riding a horse without stopping. And he cowboyed up until his health wouldn't let him anymore. He was an expert cowboy and a great teacher. Now, every boy has a dream, and mine when I was 13 years old was to be a cowboy like Murray when I got older. Well, Murray brought me back home to go to school that fall, and I ordered this pair of Crockett spurs from Cheyenne Outfitters, and Murray gave me $50, and I bought this pair of Crockett spurs. Now, I've seen some of these same spurs sell between $800 and $1,200 at auctions since then. Well, after Murray taught me how to ride a horse, I started helping around the ranch and helping other neighbors, and I had a few other ranch jobs. The last one I had was working for an old widow woman over at Edgemont, and she paid me $5 a day. Well, when I left there, I found out that I could make more money driving a truck than I could riding a horse. But I wouldn't give up the experience I learned from Murray. It was a great life, and he was a wonderful friend, and everybody liked Murray. Now we're going to talk about the Hogg family. Well, we talked about Eve a little earlier in a roundup picture, but John Hogg was born in 1844 in Virginia, and he served in the Civil War with General Sherman and was in the Battle of Bull Run. They told the story about the detachment was riding down a road one day. It was a warm summer day, and they came upon a lady lying in the road that had been shot several times in the face. Well, he said Sherman dismounted from his horse and went over and knelt down beside the young lady, and he said a few words. And when he got back on his horse, he said, "War is hell." And them words carried on through the Civil War and even into the movies as we see them today. Well, John was married, and he had 4 daughters and 3 sons. I have to have a drink of water, so bear with me a little bit. Okay, Sylvia was the only girl that I knew. Well, Sylvia Hogg did Western paintings, and I happen to have 3 of them here today. The first one is on an easel up here that belongs to me, and is a painting of the Custer's Last Stand. Now, these pictures are over 100 years old. The next picture is America, when America was young, and Sylvia's great-grandson, Jay Marsh, and his wife brought these from Hot Springs today. The next picture is Indians attacking a stagecoach. And like I say, Jay brought these from Hot Springs, and thanks for bringing them up, Jay. Well, Sylvia's paintings were as never good as Charlie Russell paintings, several people have said, and I think I would agree with that. Also, some of Sylvia's paintings were exhibited in the first Wyoming State Fair in Douglas, Wyoming in 1905. Sylvia also wrote the book, Pioneers of the Cheyenne River. She did all the artwork on this, and there's interesting stories in here about the early pioneers of the Cheyenne River. Well, Sylvia married Mike Marchant, and they made their home on Boggy Creek near the Cheyenne River, and they had 2 boys, Jim and Pat. Well, Jim married Pauline Cedric, and Pat married my dad's sister, Marjorie Marchant, and they had one son, Jack, who is Jay's father. Now, when I was 13, 14 years old, I used to go and help Pat dock lambs, or maybe just go down and visit him for a few days. And Pat would always show me a saber and a spade bit that his grandfather carried in the Civil War. It was a pretty amazing piece of history to me as a young boy. Now, there were 3 boys, the Hogg boys, Will, Jim, and Eve. Well, Eve was the only one I knew, but I do have a story about Will. Well, Will was born in 1870 in Virginia, and at 18 years old, he came west to Wyoming to be a cowboy. And one of his first jobs was working at the 21 Horse Ranch on the Cheyenne River, and that was owned by John Sayers. Well, the 21 Horse Ranch sold thousands of horses through the years, and they were shipped by rail to their new home. And Will would accompany them to their shipment. They shipped horses to Chicago, Atlanta, Georgia, and all over the country. Well, later on, Will homesteaded on Lance Creek near the Cheyenne River, where the rest of his family joined him later. Now, the Hogg brothers were known to have the best horses in the country. They brought thoroughbred horses from Kentucky out and bred them up, good bloodlines. They sold horses to the cavalry at Fort Robinson and to the officers. They had a half-mile racetrack on the ranch. They hired jockeys to run the races. The Hogg horses brought top money, and when I was a small boy, they always said, if you was riding a hog horse, you were well mounted. Now, as Eve got older, he moved in with his nephew, Pat, who was my uncle, and I have a story to tell you about Eve. Eve was at our ranch one day with Pat, and a small plane came flying over, And my brother said, Eve, you see the plane? And Eve lifted his head and said, yep. He said, did you ever ride in a plane, Eve? He said, nope, and ain't going neither. Well, my brother said, why is that? Well, he said, the damn thing might quit and they'd want me to crank it and there's no place to stand. That was a pretty good answer. Another story about Eve. Pat was getting low on meat one year along in November. So him and Eve goes over across the river to the Jim Reed Ranch to get a deer. Well, they arrived over there, a pretty chilly day. Said, Eve, why don't you just go to the bunkhouse and build a fire, and we get back with a deer, we'll have a warm place to take care of it. Well, that was okay with Eve. So Eve goes out to the old bunkhouse. It's all empty and covered with dust. He went out back and got an armload of wood, and he went inside and he opened the door on a pot-belly stove, and there sat a bottle of whiskey. Now, Eve was known to drink quite a bit during his days. Well, he sampled the whiskey, and I don't know how much he sampled, but they said when he got back to the deer, Eve was sound asleep on the floor, and the fire was burning quite well. Well, Eve died at the age of 85 years old. Now, the next person I'm going to talk about is Joe O'Brien, also known as the Wild Irishman. Did anybody know the Wild Irishman? Yeah. Okay, looks like a lot of people did. Well, I knew Joe pretty good. Joe was born in 1897 in Massachusetts, and he arrived in northern Niobrara County, west of where I grew up, in 1930. Well, my dad said when Joe arrived in 1930, he had a team of horses and a set of running gears, but no box. And he said, you'd see Joe coming over a hill on a gallop and bouncing along. Now, I wouldn't call Joe a cowboy, but he did raise both cattle and sheep. And Joe didn't have a side-by-side to check his cattle on, or a four-wheeler, but he did own a pink Cadillac. Yeah, I said a pink Cadillac, and here's a picture of it. Well, when Joe did his taxes that year, he listed the pink Cadillac as ranch equipment. Well, it seemed though the IRS didn't accept this, so to prove him wrong, they said a Cadillac was more of a luxury vehicle. So Joe loaded 4 head of sheep in the back of this pink Cadillac and headed for Cheyenne, Wyoming. Now, upon arriving, he got to the Capitol building, and he got nearly everyone he could out of the Capitol building to come out. He said, okay, boys, they paid for it, they can ride in it. Well, as near as I know, Joe took it off on his taxes. Now, could you imagine driving down Highway 85 south of Lusk, cruising along? Zoom, here comes Joe with a pink Cadillac with 4 sheep in the back. You'd think you lost your mind. Okay, now, not all ranchers were cowboys. There were some of them that were cowgirls. And the ones I knew was the Johnson sisters, who led a ranch on Lance Creek called the Cross A Ranch. They didn't raise sheep, they raised cows. And I didn't know them very well, but when I worked the sale barn off and on in the 1960s and 70s, they would bring cattle in there to the sale, and I would visit with them. There's some there. But the one I knew the best was Alberta Glasby. Now, Alberta was the nicest lady you'd ever met. Her folks were early settlers near the Cheyenne River. Alberta came from quite a large family. She was born in 1905, and she also had a twin brother who lived on Lance Creek, Albert. Well, Alberta never did marry, and she worked for her neighbor, the Tom Wilson family, her entire life. And when the Wilsons got too old to ranch, Alberta took the ranch over, and she also bought a ranch or two next door to her. Now, Alberta was probably the goodest stockman as there was in the area. She did raise both cattle and sheep. She did a lot of hard work, and she knew all about hard work. Now, if Alberta was going to be selling cattle in Edgemont at a sale, that meant she had to get up early in the morning, riding up the cattle, bring them to the corrals, get them sorted out, and get them on trucks and shipped into Edgemont, some 30, 35 miles away. Well, you know, Russ Christensen was there to help her. Like I said earlier, he helped all of his neighbors. And, you know, working them cattle and stuff, you get a little dirt and dust in your eyes, and even a little cow manure on you. But when Alberta showed up at that sale barn in Edgemont, she looked like a queen. She had a clean dress on, her hair was done, jewelry, all dolled up. She was a beautiful lady and everybody loved her. She did a lot for the community and was well liked. Well, let's see. We've talked about cowboys, trains, cowgirls, bunkhouses, but we haven't talked about any outlaws yet. And I'm going to tell you about one now, and this is Doc Middleton. He looks like an outlaw, don't he? Well, Doc Middleton, his real name was James Middleton Riley. And Doc was born in 1851 in Texas. And he had 2 or 3 different names, but most people called him Doc because he could doctor any brand to whatever he wanted. They said Doc stole his first horse when he was 14 years old. And in 1897, Doc was in a 1,000-mile horse race from Chadron, Nebraska to Chicago. He didn't win, but he did finish the race. He was also with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show for a period of time. In 1890s, Doc owned a saloon in Edgemont, South Dakota. He also owned one in Ardmore, South Dakota, near the Nebraska border and the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Now, the saloon he had in Ardmore, Doc would bootleg whiskey to the Indians on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and they'd also steal their horses. And he trailed them to Kansas and sold them. He stole horses in Kansas and trailed them back and sold them to the early settlers in northern Nebraska, southeast South Dakota, and parts of Wyoming. They said in a 2-year period, Doc had stolen over 2,000 head of horses. And he worked with a group of other outlaws called the Pony Boys. Well, Doc shot a couple of guys, and he served time in prison, and when released, he went back doing what he knew best, was stealing horses. Well, Doc's last saloon was at Orne, Wyoming, and that's near Douglas. He had a saloon, and he was operating without a liquor license. Well, the law come to arrest Doc, and they got into a scuffle, and a knife was stuck in Doc's belly, and he died a few days later. And here's Doc's headstone and his old hat, and he's buried in Douglas, Wyoming. But now Doc did do some good things. One story I heard about was there was a lady with a small child, and she didn't have no milk for this small child, and Doc heard about it, and the next morning, this milk cow was in her creel. Well, Doc was kind of a Robin Hood. He helped a lot of people too. That old cow make a good milk cow, wouldn't it? Now, I didn't go over to Lightning Creek where Sheriff Billy Miller was killed and shot, but I did go to Custer's Last Stand. And here is the cavalry riding along the Little Bighorn River at Custer's Last Stand. Another picture is of the medicine man with the horses all painted up in their headdresses. I have another picture of myself with Sacagawea and Meriwether Lewis. Also, I have this picture of my wife, Carolyn, shaking hands with General Custer. Now, if you'd like a lot of excitement and action, this reenactment happens every year on Father's Day weekend. There's a lot of excitement there, and we've been there 3 times. It's worth going to. Well, I hope you enjoyed my talk. I'll answer any of your questions or any comments. You're welcome to come up and look at any of this stuff I have on the table, books and pictures. And I want to thank you for coming. And also want to thank Cindy and my wife Carolyn for helping me put this on. Turn out the lights, the party's over. Did I say Well, it was a good crowd. You were a good audience. Thank you for coming.
Anybody want to get a picture? Come on up.